It was Halloween weekend. It was falling on a Saturday this year. My mom always takes decorations and giving out candy very seriously. It's almost like she has to compete with the neighbors to have the most sought-after house to trick-or-treat at. We live on a corner in a regular suburban neighborhood, so when we're decorating, we also decorate the side yard of the house too. Since Halloween was a Saturday this year, kids started trick-or-treating earlier in the day. However, it was a cloudy, cold day, and there was a chance of rain in the forecast. My mom apparently couldn't understand that this may have been a factor as to why there weren't many trick-or-treaters out. Instead, after a few trick-or-treaters seemingly skipped our house, she assumed it was because there weren't enough decorations out to attract the trick-or-treaters. She told me to go get whatever containers were left in the attic containing decorations. I insisted this wasn't necessary, but she insisted otherwise and forced me to, so I went up to the attic, which is directly above my bedroom. The attic door is in the hallway upstairs. I pulled down the door and climbed up the ladder. We had the holiday containers sorted a specific way, so I went over to where the Halloween containers were. There were only a couple still left up there. I opened one to see what was inside, and said good enough. I started dragging the container out towards the attic door, then I carefully slid the container down the ladder. As I was about to climb down out of the attic, I thought I heard something on the opposite side of the attic, like a piece of wood cracking under the weight or pressure of something. I looked over to the wall of containers in the far corner. It's an attic though. The sound of wood snapping or cracking really wasn't that weird. I climbed down out of the attic and brought the decorations downstairs. From there, my mom and I put out some more decorations in the front yard. It was really windy and felt like rain at any second. There really weren't many trick-or-treaters at all. My mom was disappointed because she goes all out with the candy too. She's always been one of those people who makes a bunch of homemade goodie bags with a bunch of different candies inside. I could see how upset she was that she wasn't going to give most of them away at this rate. The day progressed, and I was in my room playing video games on my laptop, while my mom was downstairs in the living room and kitchen handing out candies to the few trick-or-treaters that would come. And then, it started to rain, and that pretty much put a damper on the rest of the day trick-or-treaters-wise. I was gaming in my room when I heard a crack from above my room, in the attic. Again, not really abnormal, but I made a mental note that was the second time I heard something from up there. The rest of the day was rainy, and that night it turned into a thunderstorm. Perfect for Halloween night. I used to be a big gamer in my teens, and so instead of going out with friends on a Saturday night, I would often just stay in playing video games, unfortunately. This night was no exception to that. I stayed up really late into the night, past my parents'. It was still raining outside. Then I heard something above me again. This time it sounded like footsteps. I was wondering if my mom was in the attic putting stuff away, but it was late at night. I sat and listened for a while. The sound stopped. I paused my game and went out into the hallway after a couple minutes, and I saw the attic door was open. I now heard noises from downstairs in the kitchen. I heard the sound of things being moved around in the fridge. My heart was racing now. I tiptoed down the hall to my parents' room and quietly opened the door. When I saw both my parents fast asleep in bed, I felt my stomach twist and I felt sick. I quietly closed the door and went up to my dad to shake him awake. He woke up easily, and I whispered to him, "There's someone in the house." He immediately sat up and said, "What?" I said, "There's someone in the kitchen right now in the fridge. I think they're hiding in the attic." My dad is not a large or confrontational man. He keeps a police baton under his bed in the case of an emergency, but I don't think he ever thought he'd have to actually use it. My dad told me to stay quiet. He went to go look out into the hall quietly. When he came back inside, he whispered that he saw someone down the hall climbing into the attic. He shut the bedroom door and he locked it and then called 911. By now, my mom was awake too, but we all stayed as quiet as possible and didn't freak out. It was now a waiting game until the police showed up. My dad went downstairs to open the front door. The attic door was now shut. The police had to go inside, and they found some homeless-looking man hiding in the corner, behind that wall of containers. The sounds I was hearing were in fact from a person the whole time. The man, while seeming dirty and kind of scary looking, apparently was very straightforward and honest, and he simply walked in when he saw the front door was open the day before, and he had no place to sleep. He brought one of our blankets up there, and there was a jar of peanut butter up there too that he was eating. The whole thing is still very disturbing, and I wonder how things would have played out if I or my father confronted the man instead of the police. My parents didn't press any charges. When I was 18, I threw a house party at my parents' house for Halloween. It was closed invite, meaning I told people not to bring strangers. That was a rule my parents gave me. They were not at the house that weekend, which was why I was able to throw the party, with another rule being the place needed to be even cleaner than it was before the party. I invited around 50 people and probably around 40 ended up showing up. The party started around 6. It was starting to get dark out. It would be partially in the backyard and partially the first floor. My parents left me money for refreshments like sodas and food to leave in the kitchen for people to take. I told my parents it would be a non-alcoholic party, but I think they knew that was a load of shit. My friend, who's a few years older than me, brought his DJ equipment to DJ, and the party was in full swing by dark. Everyone seemed to listen and not bring strangers, because I recognized everyone. Just about everyone came up to me and greeted me after entering. I didn't drink too much because it was my party and I wanted to be somewhat responsible, but everyone else was getting drunker the later the night went. Eventually one of my friends came out of the house after getting food, and he asked who that guy in the skeleton bodysuit inside the house was. I didn't recall seeing anyone in a bodysuit costume, so I went inside the house, where there were a few people hanging out in the kitchen. I asked if they saw someone wearing a skeleton bodysuit, and someone told me yeah, it seems like he was snooping around the house. I grew concerned when I heard this, and I asked if anyone invited him or knew who it was. No one inside knew him. I looked around the house and then found him. He was walking down the stairs. I asked, "Who are you?" And he said, "Mike, I was using the bathroom upstairs." It was a really deep voice. He sounded older. His frame was also a bit larger, not like muscular, just a stockier looking build. I asked, "Who invited you?" And he said, "Tom." I didn't know a single Tom, so I asked, "Who's Tom?" Then I just asked him if he could take his mask off. He didn't listen or even respond. He just walked past me towards the front door, then he left. I ran upstairs to check if any of the rooms had been gone through, and if anything had been stolen. All the doors upstairs except for the bathroom door were closed, and after a quick look, it seemed nothing was stolen. So I went to lock the front door, and then I told a bunch of my friends about how weird that just was. I went outside to ask a few friends if they knew who invited the skeleton guy, and not a single person knew who it was. Eventually, I gave it a rest. The party was winding down around midnight. Most people were starting to leave. The few close friends stayed behind a little later to help clean up. After all was said and done, it was a successful party. When everyone was gone, I started getting ready for bed. One of my friends, Vinny, stayed over on the couch downstairs. After brushing my teeth and changing into pajamas, I decided to go hang out with Vinny in the living room for a while. We had some drinks and just watched funny YouTube videos on TV. My little sister, who was 14, was asleep by now. She didn't hang outside with the party because she was too young. We were being quiet so as not to wake her, but when Vinny and I both heard noises from upstairs, it seemed that we woke her up. I was expecting the sounds, which sounded like footsteps, to move to the bathroom or something. I got a little confused when I never heard my sister's door open. I decided to go upstairs just to check on her. I knocked on her door and she didn't answer. I opened it a crack and saw that she was sleeping. So what were those sounds I was hearing then? I went to my parents' room and realized the door wasn't clicked shut. I was able to just push it open without twisting the doorknob, which was odd because I made sure their door was closed before the party. I looked inside the room without turning on the lights. Then, as I backed out of the room, I looked through the crack of the door, and on the other side, I saw that guy in the skeleton bodysuit. I made no mistake, I knew what I was looking at. I'm impressed with myself for not running or screaming. I pretended I didn't see him and pulled the door closed. Then I went downstairs and told Vinny that the guy from before is in the house. I had him call 911 and tell them that there's an intruder in the house, while I tiptoed back upstairs to my sister's room, went inside, and shook her to wake her up. I explained to her what was going on and made sure she would be quiet while following me downstairs. She did a good job not freaking out either. When we were downstairs, we met Vinny in the kitchen by the back door, where we went outside to the backyard. Then we cut through the side to the front, went to our neighbor's house, ringing the bell at least 3 times. Our neighbor let us wait with him for the police, but at some point before the police got there, that guy escaped through our parents' bedroom window. I know because the window was now open. Their closet door was also open where my dad keeps his safe. It's as if it were someone who knew about the safe being there that tried breaking into it or just taking the whole safe out from the floor. It was obvious how the man broke in. He simply just walked into the party again. It could have been any number of people though. We never found out who it was, but it was someone who knew I was having a party, someone older, and someone who knew about my parents' safe. My sister ended up telling our parents about it, and obviously that was the last party I was ever allowed to throw at their house. This happened in 2016, when I was 15. This would be my last year trick-or-treating on Halloween, so I wanted to make it a big occasion. My mom is pretty laid back, so it turned into a huge multi-day thing for me. The day before Halloween, I would have a sleepover with my friends Davis and Zach, skip school the next day on Halloween, trick-or-treat with Davis and Zach, and then have a sleepover with just my girlfriend Amber and I. This story carries into both nights, so I'll try to explain the best I can. My basement had just gotten renovated into a man cave, so obviously my friends and I wanted to stay down there for the night. The basement had a long hallway right to the man cave, and the light switch to the hallway didn't work. It had a pretty creepy vibe, but for tonight, that would be a good thing. My mom made us cookies and then we went down into the cave. It was around 11 p.m. and we had just finished watching the original Scream. Our second movie of the night would be Paranormal Activity, which none of us had watched before, and that's why I picked it. I remember pausing the movie not even 30 seconds in because of the motion-detected light in the backyard turning on. It lit the whole room up, ruining the creepy vibe we had going. So I waited for the 30-second timer so it would turn off, and then unpaused the movie. Then after about another 30 seconds, the light went off for a second time, and I started getting annoyed. Davis asked me what kept making it turn on, and I said I had no clue. 30 more seconds passed by, and the light turned off again, and I played the movie again. It was at this point I wanted to know what the hell was going on, and so I asked for Davis and Zach to come upstairs with me so I could see what it was. They agreed and went up the stairs to look through my back door. By the time we got there, the light in the backyard had turned off, so it was hard to see. We stood for 5 minutes waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever did. We went back down to the den and decided to turn off the movie for the night and just sit on our phones and talk. We weren't really invested in it anyway. About 2 hours later, everyone was asleep except for me. I was just scrolling on my phone when the familiar glow of the motion light came through the window for now the 4th time. I was exhausted though, and so I figured it was just another group of kids trying to prank us or something. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. I figured I would check the backyard one last time. Just like I thought would happen, no one was out there. I gave up, so I went back down to the den and called it a night. The next night came in the blink of an eye, and next thing I knew I had a bag full of candy. I felt kind of sad. In a way, this was like my childhood ending. However, I figured I should just try and enjoy the night and not reminisce. At this point, I still had lingering thoughts about the previous night, whether I should tell Amber or not. She was scared of everything, and I didn't want to ruin a night with her over a story. We were at one of our last houses on the route we took, when Amber let out a loud yell in pain. We asked what happened, and then she told us that she had a rock thrown at her. I turned around to find some guy in a clown mask standing around 15 feet behind us. This was amid the clown epidemic. I told him to get lost, but he just stood there. I analyzed him a bit more and realized this guy looked like a grown man. He only had a clown mask on also. The rest of his quote-unquote costume was just normal clothes. We kept walking, but all the man did was stand there. It was at this point we called it a night and skipped the last few houses out of anxiety. We went back to my house so my friends could get picked up. And just like that, it was just my girlfriend and I looking at candy on the floor in the den. She asked if we could watch a movie, so I decided that I would just turn on Paranormal Activity again later that night to finish it. I remember the scene in the movie perfectly. It was Miko walking around to find his girlfriend, when suddenly the screen went black, and the dimmed lights in the cave turned off. My girlfriend and I looked at each other. I realized the power went out. This immediately made me start to get paranoid. The power had never gone out in this house unless there was a storm. I checked my weather app and it said it was normal conditions that night, not even a little bit of rain. I told Amber to stay in the cave, but she felt scared down there, so she decided to come upstairs with me to see what was going on. The generator to the house was in the backyard, and that's when I got the terrible feeling in my stomach. The thoughts of last night creeping back to me, and this time I didn't have Davis and Zach with me. Amber wasn't very strong. All the worst thoughts came to my mind as I opened the sliding door to the backyard. All I heard was crickets chirping. I figured that maybe I was just overthinking. Amber and I passed by the motion light, which didn't kick on now. I was about 5 feet from the generator when I thought I heard a twig snap. Amber and I looked towards the forest on the far side of the yard, with the only sounds being crickets. But we felt like we were being watched. I almost felt like I had to throw up. I decided we'd rather stay in the house with no lights on than be out here. I didn't want to be outside any longer. Amber started making her way inside. That's when I saw him. The same guy in a clown mask, standing to the side of my shed. We just stared at each other for a while, like he was trying to scare us. And then he suddenly jumped forward and started sprinting at us. I ran to the back door and slammed it shut after Amber. We ran down into the cave, and we got behind the bar in the corner of the room. That's when I realized I never locked the back door, and we heard a slam from upstairs. Now everything was silent in the man cave. Amber started texting 911 because she was too scared to talk. She explained that there was a man in the house. Minutes felt like hours. Must have been like 10 minutes tops, and the sound I had been dreading to hear came. The basement door opening. I heard footsteps come down the stairs and down the hallway. My girlfriend was breathing too loud. I had to cover her mouth. I heard footsteps come towards our direction and stop. I was starting to think my only option might be to fight if he finds out where we were. I grabbed a beer bottle from behind the bar and prepared myself mentally to fight if I had to. The room stayed silent for quite a while, but then we heard sirens come from outside. I realized this was the perfect distraction and moment to strike. In a fraction of a second, I got up, ran at him, and swung at his head with the bottle. But I tripped and fell after I swung, and I hit the ground. I looked up to see that man with the clown mask from earlier. I think his mask somewhat blocked my swing because he barely flinched. I realized this was a stupid idea because it seemed like he was about to go back upstairs after hearing the sirens anyway. Looked down at me on the floor. I was about to yell at Amber to run as I laid on the floor, scrambling to get up. My legs felt numb. I realized my life could potentially end right now, but the police could be heard outside. The man stared for another moment before running up the stairs. Then we heard the back door open and slam again. I ran upstairs to let the police in and told them he went out back. And of course you're wondering, the answer is no, the police somehow never caught this guy to my knowledge. I can't go down to that man cave alone anymore without feeling anxious, even to this day. So we would hang out at Amber's for a while after that. There's nothing I can do but look back and be grateful that we're still alive. I'll never forget that feeling of looking up and seeing that clown mask staring down at me as I flailed on the ground. Halloween 2016. My three friends and I, who for the purpose of this story will be named J, K, and L respectively, were trick-or-treating downtown. Downtown was always a mob scene on Halloween only because the houses were so close together, meaning more candy for the amount walked. 10 o'clock was always the time things really started to die down, and by 10:30 we were really the only kids still out trick-or-treating. Only like 1 in 10 houses actually opened their doors this late, so we called it quits with the trick-or-treating and decided to just screw around. It was a Saturday night after all. As we called it quits with the trick-or-treating, a lone person in a clown costume was walking really, really slowly from the black fog in the distance. This was a legit clown costume too. The makeup was crazy. From the slit-mouth smile to the blood-filled boils, it was a scary costume. The 4 of us laughed and screamed in reaction, but ultimately walked away. We went to a park that was nearby to just goof around, make a mess with silly string and shaving cream and whatever. We weren't the first, however. Strands of silly string littered the playground, as well as shaving cream smudged on the walls of a bathroom building in the park to spell out obscenities. We all hung out on the playground, but Jay pointed out to the dark horizon, where 2 clowns were walking over to us. One of them the same clown from earlier. I didn't think it was possible, but the second clown was even more disturbing than the first. The first clown now seemed to be wielding some kind of long, spear-like object. They both approached us really, really slowly. The funniness of the situation quickly wore off as they got closer and closer. Then they started to charge us. We all ran in different directions. One of the 2 clowns was chasing me. Out the park and down the street I ran. I didn't know the area too well, but I did know how to get back to Elle's house. I ran all the way there. About halfway there I lost the clown. I called Elle and told him I was in his backyard. He was out of breath, but he said he just lost one of the clowns and was on his way over now. I said I'd call Jay, and he said he'd call Kay. Luckily Jay picked up on the first ring. He wasn't being chased, so he didn't sound as freaked out as Elle did. I told him to meet us at Elle's house. 10 minutes later, all 4 of us were in Elle's backyard, gathering our thoughts and discussing what just went down. We had a good laugh about it now that it was over as we ate some of the candies that we got. Kay went home, while me, Jay, and Elle hung out in the living room for a while. Lights off, TV on, playing some Xbox One party game. Jay looked out the window and then ducked and told us to shh and turn off the TV. When we asked why, he said there was a clown out there. I didn't believe him, so I looked out the window. He screamed, "Don't," but it was too late. The clown standing outside of Elle's house looked right at me through the window. I shut the curtains and told Elle he wasn't lying. His parents weren't home, so going to his dad wasn't an option. Instead, we shut off the TV and went upstairs to Elle's bedroom. We looked out the window. The clown wasn't there anymore. Actually, we never saw either of the clowns again. But the next morning, Elle texted the 3 of us, saying he found a rubber clown nose on his backyard patio table. He said it was obviously placed there with intent to scare us, and mission accomplished because it worked. Luckily, that clown epidemic didn't last more than a month later. After that, it just became an old story. It was a school night Halloween. My mom and dad took my 2 twin brothers out trick-or-treating. I didn't have plans, so my parents kind of forced me to answer the door and hand out candies while they were gone. Since we live in a cul-de-sac on a dead-end street, we get next to no trick-or-treaters on Halloween, so every time the doorbell rang I kind of jumped. I was in the living room watching TV, with the bucket of candies next to me on a small table. Butterfingers, the one and only candy my mom always got on Halloween for some reason. The doorbell rang, so I took the orange bucket and brought it to the door and opened it. There was someone in a scream mask and robe holding out a pillow sack. It didn't look like he got a lot of candy for the night, and given that the night was almost over and nobody was really coming to the house, and he was alone, which is always kind of sad, I gave him a bunch of candy. He walked away without saying thanks, which kind of made me feel bad, but it was honestly whatever. I stopped thinking about it as soon as I sat back down on the couch. The movie I was watching ended, so I started surfing the channels. During one of the brief moments of silence as the TV flipped from one channel to the other, I heard a thud and a bump come from downstairs near the back door. To better hear what it could have been, I turned the volume on the TV all the way down and went to the stairway. The back door was wide open. My heart started racing as I started to feel sick inside. I'd forgotten to lock it when I went back there. The big question was if what I heard was the sound of the door opening or closing, and if someone was in the house. Naturally, I called down the stairway for my mom and dad, and then my twins' names. The silence from down in the dark den was creepy as hell. I was afraid to go down there. Unfortunately, there's no door to separate the main floor from the den stairway, so sitting in the living room suddenly didn't seem very comfortable. I kept the TV on but muted. I just felt safer with the extra light it provided. It took a while for some reason, but it finally hit me to call my parents and ask them to come home. My mom said they'd be home within half an hour. I told my mom I was scared that someone was downstairs because I heard something. She assured me that there was nothing and it was just my imagination. I hung up the phone and immediately heard the sound of wood foundation cracking under one of the carpeted steps to the den. I froze on the couch. Literally, I couldn't move a muscle, not even a finger. Then there was another crack. As silently as I could, I sat up from the couch into a half-crouched position, tiptoeing to the front door. But as I passed the couch that blocked the view of the den stairway from the living room, I saw something on the stairway. It was a scream mask, leering up from the stairs at me, but in a way where he was obviously not trying to get caught. The angle at which I saw the mask and the dark lighting made the sight so much more disturbing. When he saw me, though, he went the other way, back into the darkness of the den. I locked myself in my room upstairs and called my mom again to tell her what happened. They cut their trip short and came home. Only when my parents got home did I feel safe to leave my room. My dad and I checked the whole den, every closet, every room. Luckily, there was no one. The moral of the story simply comes down to keeping your doors locked, because apparently this guy just helped himself through our back door. Hey. My older brother was having a Halloween party. He was a sophomore in college. I was actually only in the 8th grade. Our parents weren't home all weekend, so he was taking advantage of the opportunity, I guess. He made it abundantly clear he didn't want me in the house during the party, but fortunately I already made plans to go trick-or-treating with 2 of my friends. We all agreed it would probably be our last year trick-or-treating, so we wanted to make it a good time. We started midday right after school, the prime time where most kids were out, most everyone answers their doors, and still had abundant supplies of candies. We each filled 2 bags of candy by dark, making stops at our houses in between to bring them home, of course. But we weren't done. We weren't satisfied yet. We needed another bag, of course. After eating dinner and resting at my friend's place for a while, we went back out with empty bags and flashlights. You'll find out why in a little bit. It was probably around 9 o'clock now. Getting candy was a bit slower by now since most buckets were empty and not everyone was answering their doors. An hour flew by because we were still having fun, though we didn't get much candy this time. By the time it was like 10:30 or 11, we stopped because it just seemed obnoxious to knock on people's doors this late. Everyone already went home because it was a Tuesday night, a work night and school night. But we already agreed we'd be skipping school the next day. We were all in the same homeroom and already knew nothing was going on at school tomorrow. So to us, the night was still young. So we went for a run to what locals called the Ghoul House. It was a house with some history. A couple got divorced after their child somehow died in the house, and then the wife moved out. Couple weeks later, the husband shot himself at the kitchen table. It's been fenced off ever since. Why the house hasn't been sold or torn down by now is beyond me. When we got there, we realized how scary the house was in the dark. It stood taller than the other houses, and it had a black fence surrounding the front yard, with overgrown bushes hugging it. The front gate was pretty easy to hop. The deviance of what we were doing just made it so much more thrilling. We walked around back just to be safe, hoping no neighbors would see us. The back windows were boarded up from the inside, and the back door had a table wedged up against it. Someone clearly tried really hard to keep people out, possibly a neighbor. Through teamwork, we were able to lift the table quietly from off the door and onto the grass. The door was missing a doorknob, and it pushed in relatively easily. We were inside, and it felt weird, felt uncomfortable, and at the same time exhilarating. All of us had our flashlights, creating a decent amount of light in the otherwise pitch-black building. We were in the back living area of the house, some kind of den. The wood floors were all creaky as hell, and everything seemed to have been untouched for years. It didn't seem like anyone ever really broke in there before. That room was clear of anything interesting, so we moved on to the kitchen. An archaic fridge sat in the corner. One of my friends opened it up, and immediately the room filled with a stale, rotten, plasticky type odor. The fridge had some old empty milk and orange juice cartons. That was about it. The whole kitchen smelled foul, so we got out of there quickly. Next was the living room, and this room was just creepy. Something about it, I don't know, it just made you think that any time you turned around, there'd be someone standing in one of the corners. One of my friends pointed his light up and said, "Look at that." There was a giant hole in the ceiling, which led right up to a room upstairs. As my other friend and I also shined our lights up there was a couple thumps from right above us. We all shut our lights. I got that horrible, painful feeling in my heart area from what I just heard. We all whispered very, very lightly that those were definitely footsteps. One friend whispered we should go up there, see what it was. My other friend and I said absolutely no way and started tiptoeing to the back door. But he was persistent. He didn't follow us. Instead, he went upstairs. He didn't even make a good effort at being quiet about it. We kind of felt like we had to wait for him down in the living room now, so we stayed put. We heard his footsteps upstairs now, crossing the upstairs of the house, until he stopped right above us. My eyes were adjusted to the dark by this point, so even without our flashlights on, I was able to see the figure of my friend, standing above us, looking down through that hole in the ceiling. I tried whispering up there loud enough so that he could hear, but apparently he couldn't. I didn't want to get any louder, but suddenly we heard footsteps coming from the stairway in the living room. We both turned on our flashlights and shined them up to the top of the staircase to see our other friend walking down the stairs. The realization set in immediately, and neither of us had the balls to shine our lights up to that hole in the ceiling to see who was actually standing there. I just screamed, "Run!" and we all booked it to the back door, out the house, and to one of my friend's house. The friend who went upstairs said he smelled something foul up there, like a rotting carcass, and that he also heard breathing coming from one of the rooms. To this day, we have no idea who was in that house, but it seemed unlikely that it was just another curious wanderer, given how boarded up the house was. To say the least, we don't go there anymore. This happened back when I was 17, my last Halloween at home before going away to college. It was Halloween in our peaceful town where nothing bad ever happens. Our house is in the wealthier side of town, and while our house would be described as gorgeous by anyone not from the area, the real head turner is our next door neighbor's house. It sits on that line of being called just a huge house or a mansion. They always go crazy with their decorations for any holiday, specifically Halloween and Christmas. This one year was no exception. By October 1st, they already had all their crazy decorations out. Some houses go the cute and innocently spooky route, like with smiling ghosts and blow-up decorations. But our neighbors go the actual scary route, with the fake graves, fake bloody body bags, actually scary-looking fake corpses, etc. It actually draws a lot of attention. People know to drive by and take videos, so it's never uncommon to see cars just sitting in front of their house in the middle of the street from time to time. I'll rename my neighbors' names to Mike and Donna just to not blow up their spots even more. Fast forward to Halloween Day. It was luckily a Friday this year, so that meant parties and all that could be held on actual Halloween. My dog Bear sleeps downstairs in the corner of our dining room, and he woke me up really early morning, like 4 a.m. when it was still pitch black outside. He was barking at something outside. I yelled across the house to shut up there, and my mom came out into the hall and did the same. Bear stopped barking after this, but I had no idea what he was barking at. I fell back asleep quickly after that, then woke up to my alarm like 2 hours later. So I started getting ready for school as my dad was leaving for work, and as he stepped out onto the front deck, he came back in and got mad at me and said, "Damn it, Zach, clean up the dog shit." He thought I let our dog crap in the front of the house for some reason. I told him I definitely didn't though. He was in a hurry, so he left without more arguing. Next up, it was my turn to leave for school, and as I left the house, I got a whiff of something kind of unpleasant. I now knew what my dad was talking about. I didn't see any dog crap anywhere though. Later when I got home around 2, I still smelled that smell. I had no idea what it was, but it was really starting to stink. My parents were both at work. My parents wanted me to hand out candy when trick-or-treaters started coming. It wasn't until around 4 to 5 that they started coming. When I opened the door to the first few trick-or-treaters, I get a whiff of that increasingly horrible stink, and the kids and their parents clearly smelt it too because they were all commenting on it. One parent told me it was even worse next door. I started to know whenever to expect the doorbell to ring because I'd hear groups of people pointing out how horrible it smells. At one point I saw Mike and Donna in front of their house, looking around, so I went outside and went over to ask them if they smelt that too. But that was hardly a question because it got worse on their property. It clearly was coming from the front of their property, but there wasn't any dog crap or anything. The smell was coming from one of the body bag decorations, only it apparently wasn't a decoration. The couple had a number of fake body bags leaned on things like the mailbox in their front tree, but there was one just laying flat on the ground, and Mike said to Donna that he didn't put that one there when she asked. The smell was unbearable from this bag. Mike ran to grab a knife and cut the bag open, and what we saw made me sick. He of course cut the top of the bag open, revealing the rotting face of an actual human corpse inside the bag. We all put our hands over our mouths in disgust, wanting to throw up. And of course there was an audience of kids and parents to see what was going on. It became a huge scene. Mike called the cops, and their whole front yard literally became a crime scene with people gathering from all over to watch, even though the cops kept telling everyone to clear out. The body was taken away. I told the police that my dog Bear was barking last night at like 4 a.m., and he may have been barking at whoever dumped the body there. Mike told my dad a week later that the body turned out to be a local 30-something-year-old guy who had taken his own life. As for who dropped the body there or why, that's unclear. Mike and Donna are very likable people, so we all think it was somebody who just looked at them as some rich, snobby household that overdoes it with the decorations for attention. Obviously, there are some sick people out there. I'm a single 24-year-old female living alone in my grandma's house. The house was basically left to me after she passed away because my mom didn't want to sell it, and she also doesn't want to move out of her house. So I get to stay in my grandma's house alone. This was last year Halloween, my first one living in the house alone. I considered just leaving a ball of candies on the stoop, but I figured that was not the best way to associate a friendly face to the house that I was new to living in. The day went pretty normally. Halloween was on a Sunday, so the trick-or-treaters started coming early on in the day, and it continued all day. Some people asked if my grandma was home, sadly unaware that she had passed away. I explained to those people that I'm her granddaughter and that I live here now. My grandma was a very loved lady, so it was no shock to me how many people asked about her that day. Mostly everyone who knocked on the door was very friendly and normal. Later on that night, past 9 o'clock, when the trick-or-treaters had dwindled down almost completely, I heard a voice outside the front door say trick or treat. No knocking or ringing the doorbell. I was in the kitchen, so I definitely would have heard any knocking. But it did seem possible that he thought he pressed the doorbell but didn't. When I went out to greet him, I saw it was this average height guy in a purple suit and creepy plastic mask. I don't really know what the costume was supposed to be, but it was interesting, I guess. When I opened the door, he said trick or treat again, but the strange thing was I could tell the guy was a bit older, like a full-grown adult, and he was changing his voice to be a little higher pitched, like he was trying to sound younger. It was strange. I assumed he may have had some issues, so whatever. I asked him what his costume was supposed to be, but he didn't answer. We just made eye contact through his mask. I took 2 pieces of candy and dropped it in his pillow sack he was holding, which looked completely empty. That was the part that weirded me out the most. He looked into the sack, then back at me. I said have a good night and closed the door. That was weird. He was the last trick-or-treater of the night. I wondered if he was accompanied by anybody watching over him, because I assumed he was special needs or something. He was clearly a 30-something-year-old man behind that mask. The rest of the candies I just left on the dining room table. Halloween was over. Or so I thought. The next night, around the same time as the previous night, I heard a loud trick-or-treat at the front door. That same creepy fake high-pitched voice. I had to have imagined it, I thought. But when I went to check through the peephole in the door, it was him again, in the same costume, and by the looks of it he had an equally empty pillow sack as the night before. I didn't open the door and no shot in hell. A few minutes later, I heard him shout trick or treat again. I ignored it. In fact, I shut off the living room lights to basically say, hey, get off my stoop, I'm not answering the door. I went upstairs to my room and shut the door and started watching TV in there instead. Out of sight, out of mind. Until I heard a pop at my window. Something was thrown at it like a rock. I muted the volume on the TV, and a few seconds later, I heard the familiar trick or treat. I suddenly was in panic mode. Why was he doing this? I went to the window, lifted it up, and looked down. That man in the purple suit and mask was looking up at me. I threatened him with calling the police. In response, he very slowly lifted his empty-looking pillow sack up and held it open. It seemed he was some asshole trying to scare me, but Halloween was over and I wasn't amused. I called 911 and police showed up in under 10 minutes. The guy was still outside. He refused to talk to them, so they put him in handcuffs and took his mask off. And as I figured, it was some creepy-looking 30-something-year-old guy. They told me they were bringing him down to the station, but apparently they let him out within 48 hours, because 2 nights later, he came back to my house, this time at the backyard door. He never knocked or rang the bell. He'd just stand outside with his empty sack and costume, creepily yelling trick or treat. I called the police again and told them he's back, and once again the police came and arrested him. I swear to God, a week later the man had returned once again, throwing a rock in my window. This time when I called 911, he seemed to actually disappear before the police had gotten there. But regardless, it seemed the police didn't really care to do anything, either that or they couldn't. Luckily, I think the man lost interest because he hasn't returned since then, at least as far as I know, unless he's been hiding in my bushes watching me, which is disturbing to imagine. Halloween is coming up, and I'm kind of nervous he's gonna come back. I was 10 years old in 5th grade. I was planning on going trick-or-treating with my friend Jordan. We already knew the route we were gonna take. It was the first year that we were being allowed to trick-or-treat alone. My mom gave us big bags for candy. It was a weekend night, so we could luckily stay out later. We did some day trick-or-treating, and after about 2 hours, we went back to my house and took a break. My parents ordered Chinese food for dinner. Jordan stayed for dinner. Then around like 7 or 8, we went back out for some night trick-or-treating. My parents wanted us to stay close. We obviously said yes to that, but we kind of strayed off a different, further away route that we knew less kids would go down. Everything was going as normal. Less houses would open their doors after dark, we noticed though, but there were still some kids out trick-or-treating since it was the weekend. One house we got to, we rang the bell, and within like 10 seconds, as if he were waiting by the door, a man opened up. Looking back, he was a bald man, looked like he was 45, and had a small gap between his 2 front teeth that we noticed when he smiled as he opened the door. He was overly friendly from the start, complimenting our costumes, trying to ask us where we're from, and just being overly conversational. We just wanted candy. He eventually said he has the candy inside if we want to come in for a second. Followed with, he wanted to show us this cool Halloween decoration he had inside. He described it as some talking skeleton trapped in a cage begging to be let out. Jordan and I weren't comfortable going inside this man's house though, obviously. When we said that in not so many words, he said he understood and asked if we wanted to come in real quick just to pick out the candies that we wanted. We said it's fine, he could just give us whatever. He tried to insist one more time and we said no, and he said no worries, then went inside to grab us some random candies. They were these chewy candies wrapped in see-through wrappers. We thanked him and left. As we walked away from his front door, we noticed he didn't close the door. He just watched us as we left. We walked away from his house down the sidewalk, and after another glance back, we now noticed he was walking in front of his house slowly with his hands on his hips. We considered running away, but there were other people down the block, so nothing would happen most likely. We just skipped the next house and went to the house 2 doors down. A woman answered, and we told her about the creepy man 2 doors down. She said she didn't know him at all, but that we should tell our parents when we get home. We ran into these 2 kids going in the direction of the creepy man's house, and we stopped them and warned them not to go there, and their reactions said it all. They already went to his house too, and had the same exact thing happen to them. They looked to be our age as well. We asked what candy he gave them, and it turned out to be the same candies. They already threw theirs away, so we dug into our bags, found them, and threw them away as well. If anybody would be sus enough to lace candies, it would be a guy like that. We wondered what exactly that man was trying to do if we were to have actually entered his house. Like, was he actually just innocently trying to show us something, or did he have other intentions? Our question was answered the next day, because that man ended up on the news for attempting to lure kids into his house, claiming he had a new puppy. It seemed his story changed for different kids, possibly based on their ages. Thank God it sounded like everyone was smart enough to not enter the man's house. I experienced a sketchy situation on Halloween a couple years ago. My cousin came over for Halloween that year just to go trick-or-treating. I was 15 at the time, and I know that's a bit old for trick-or-treating, but hey, it's free candy. My cousin was also 15, and we were planning on taking it easy that Halloween and just hitting enough houses to make a reasonable haul before we went home. My friend and his younger brother went with us, but we eventually went our separate ways. It was pretty busy, and there was a whole lot of kids at every house with decorations up. My cousin Jack and I decided to hit some of the houses with lights on with no kids already on the front stoops. Lots of houses that we had already hit before that had no decorations up and had lights on, all had people inside ready to deliver candy to trick-or-treaters. But all the other kids I know for a fact target the heavily decorated houses. We ended up getting through like 4 houses in a minute because of no lineups. The next house in the line was not decorated at all, but there was a light on, so we thought we'd give it a shot. We knocked on the door, and immediately an older man opened the door. He opened it completely, which revealed 5 other guys just standing there. They were much younger than the older man who opened the door. I'm guessing they were in their late 30s, while the older man who opened the door was in his early 50s. He held out a bowl of candy, then reached in and grabbed some and put it in each of our bags. The older man asked Jack what his name was, and Jack responded to his question using a fake name. Jack said bye before the older man could say anything else. We walked off the front stoop, and alarms immediately started going off in my head. Jack seemed alarmed as well, and we started talking about how sketchy that was. Why were there 6 guys right there when we opened the door? Why were they all acting so strange? Those were the questions that were floating around in my head. Jack and I were a little spooked because of how weird that was. We went to 2 more houses, then we started walking to my house. Jack and I glanced back at that house to see a car pulling out of the driveway. The car drove up the way we were walking and started slowing down right next to us. The roads were clear, and all the trick-or-treaters were on the sidewalks, so there should have been no reason the car slowed down right next to us. We picked up the pace a bit, and that's when another car sped up behind them, eventually beginning to go the same pace as the first car. I recognized the guy driving the first car and the guy driving the second car. The guy driving the first car was the older guy who gave us the candy, and the driver in the second car was one of the 5 guys just standing there suspiciously. There was also somebody in the passenger seat in the first car, but all I could see was the silhouette of the person. When Jack and I were 2 houses away from my house, we saw the first car park right across the street from my house. We didn't even see where the second car went, we just bolted back inside my house. Our parents, who were sitting in the living room talking, asked us what was wrong. We told them the whole story, and when we were finished, we went to the window to check if that car was still parked across the street, and it was. But then 5 seconds after I checked, it drove off. It had probably been parked there for the 5 minutes since we went inside my house. My mom and Jack's mom wanted Jack and I to go show our dads the house where all those guys were in. But eventually, our parents calmed us down and told us it was just a Halloween gag or something. Though I had my own theory on what was going on. The reason why there were 6 guys in the main doorway was because when a lone trick-or-treater or group of trick-or-treaters much younger than Jack and I came to the door, they were looking to jump or snatch them. But when they saw that Jack and I were teenagers and literally the same height as them, they decided to play it cool, even though they still looked sketchy. And why they were following us in their cars, we will never know. But when the night ended and everyone was off to bed, I realized that house is only 1 block from my house. This was many years ago. My old buddy Anthony and I were getting on our costumes to go trick-or-treating. We started going house to house just like a normal night. We got to the old part of our neighborhood where our parents would tell us not to go because we are only 12 years old and we didn't know our way around there. We walked up to the first house there, and a nice lady opened the door who gave us big Hershey bars. After that, while we were walking to literally only the second house in this part of the neighborhood, this random guy came screaming and running towards us down the street. He came out from behind a church. We thought it was just a Halloween prank at first, like anyone would, so we stood there just laughing. But as soon as he got up to us, he tried taking the pillowcase full of candy out of my hands, so my buddy Anthony started hitting him with his pillowcase. By the time we got to this old neighborhood, we had a lot of candy, so being hit with that pillowcase surely had to hurt. Anthony was hitting him until he let go of the pillowcase and started running away. We thought that was the end of him, until we started walking back, extremely shocked and confused. I called my mom and asked her if she could pick us up because we were pretty far from home, and that whole experience kind of made us want to get off the streets. As soon as she got to our location, we explained what happened, and she almost didn't believe us. That's how ridiculous it sounded. We got home around 10 p.m., and shortly after that, there was a knock at the front door. My dad figured it was just a late-night trick-or-treater, so we went to answer the door, and standing there was a man in a jumpsuit with a Michael Myers mask. My dad was confused because he was wondering what he was doing out alone trick-or-treating, and based on his height and build, he looked like an older man, not a kid or a teenager. Either way, my dad just gave him candy and didn't really care to say anything. But while Anthony and I were sitting on the couch, we noticed him staring at us, like his masked face was staring right at us in the living room. I felt slightly unsettled by it and was waiting for him to just turn and leave. My dad ended up shutting the door in his face when he wouldn't walk away. So fast forward to like 1 in the morning. We were about to go to bed, but on our way upstairs, we heard a knock at the door. There was no way I was opening the door at that hour, and I knew this couldn't be anything good this late. So I went to tell my dad there was a knock at the door, and he said just ignore it. So Anthony and I go up to the room and turn on a movie. Anthony heard something though, and told me to mute the TV, and when I did, I heard it too. It was the sound of leaves crackling in the backyard. I looked in the backyard, and I saw that man in the Michael Myers costume, swinging on the swing set in our yard, staring into my bedroom window. I felt like my heart jumped out of my chest and up into my throat. It's like he was purposely recreating a scene from a horror movie to scare us. I ran into my dad's room and told him that the man in the Michael Myers costume was on our swing set. He took on this expression of shock and concern just like ours, and he looked outside. He didn't see anyone there. Then, right when we were looking, we heard a knock at the back door. My dad went downstairs to the door, but nobody was there. This man was toying with us, harassing us to scare us. It had to be a Halloween prank. My dad was equally concerned now. All of a sudden, I heard my mom scream in the other room. So Anthony, my dad, and I ran upstairs to see the man in the Michael Myers costume, standing at the end of the bed staring at my mom. My dad told Anthony and I to run and call the police. My friend and I ran downstairs and I grabbed the nearest phone. We called 911 and told them that a man dressed as Michael Myers had broken into our house. The operator asked if everyone was all right. I said he's upstairs, and my dad has him, but we needed cops immediately. She told me to stay on the phone and that police were en route to the house. From upstairs, there was the sound of my dad screaming, followed by their sliding window being pushed open. The two of us ran upstairs to see my mom and dad laying on the floor. My mom was crying, my dad's nose was bleeding. My dad said the man jumped out through the window. When the police arrived, Anthony, my dad, and I told them everything we could. They did a sweep of the property inside and out, which took about 20 minutes, and the premises was clear. I think that might have been my last year trick-or-treating, and for good reason. I still wonder if the man that tried to take my candy was the man wearing the Michael Myers costume, and I deeply regret leaving that part out of the story we gave to the police. Halloween was always one of my least favorite days of the year. I never had a lot of friends in middle school or high school, so I never really had any plans on Halloween. In middle school, I didn't really go trick-or-treating, and in high school, I never really went to any Halloween parties. This was also at a time when my sister was away at college, so due to the fact that my parents were hardly ever home, I'd usually be home alone. This was one of many Halloween nights that I was left home alone. Halloween was on a Friday this particular year, so kids were out in droves and later than usual. My parents were gone for the week. My mom left a bunch of bags of candy for me to hand to kids. I got kind of sick of the doorbell ringing every 5 minutes all day, so eventually I just poured an entire bag of candies into a plastic bowl we had in one of the kitchen cabinets. My mom never really liked leaving a bowl on the stoop, but she wasn't there, so what was she gonna do? That lasted a good while because the constant ringing of the doorbell stopped for a couple hours at least, and when the bowl was empty, I refilled it. I wasn't expecting to hear the doorbell again the rest of the night because even if the bowl were emptied, I assumed people would know not to bother ringing the bell at a house with an empty bowl. So when the bell did ring again, I was not only surprised but also felt a hint of annoyance. I ignored the first ring, but about 30 seconds later there was another ring. This time I got up from my computer, pausing the game I was playing, and went out to check who was at the front door. I opened the door, and there were two guys in white vendetta masks holding small plastic bags with very minimal candy inside, it seemed. Neither of the two of them said trick or treat. They just ominously both stood there and then lifted up their bags and held them open. I said, "Hang on, I'll get more candy." I felt intimidated, if I'm being honest. I went to get the bag of Reese's and grabbed a few to put in their bags. When I dropped the candies in their plastic bags, one of them, I don't know which, asked in a monotone voice, "Are you home alone?" I said no, but with a stutter because the question scared me. I said, "My parents are here." Then I said, "Have a good night," and shut the door. I waited by the door listening to see if I'd hear them walk down the steps. I finally heard footsteps leaving, so I felt relieved and started going back upstairs. But that question, "Am I home alone?" kept haunting me. I couldn't just go back to my game after hearing that. And then I realized the possibility as to why they would have asked me that, because there were no cars at all in the driveway or in front of the house, yet the lights were on. Then when I, an at the time 14-year-old kid, opened the door, it probably looked like the easiest target ever. My paranoia was clearly justified though, because while sitting at my desk trying to get back into my game, I heard this loud bang from my window. I was on the second floor, so clearly something was just thrown at the window. My heart started to pound the inside of my chest again. In response, I turned off the computer screen and desk lamp to bring darkness into the room. I then looked out the window, and though I couldn't see anything out there because it was too dark, another object was thrown at the window right in front of me, this one scaring me even more than the last. It sounded like a rock. I instantly felt this intensifying sense of danger. I ducked back down behind the window and left my bedroom. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, only an iPod Touch, so I had to get to the kitchen house phone. I crawled my way down the stairs so not to be seen through any of the windows. I got to the kitchen phone and dialed 911, but I think they saw even just the light from the little screen of the phone, because there was suddenly an aggressive banging on one of the kitchen windows. By now I was on the phone with 911 begging for help. As I crouch walked out of the kitchen and towards the back door, I screamed, realizing there was one of the guys in the vendetta masks on the other side of the back door, trying to open it. I started screaming into the phone for help, but around the same time, a familiar voice was calling from the other side of the front door. It was our next door neighbor, Chris. I rushed to answer the door and he came in, clearly happy to see I was okay. He took the phone from me and spoke to the police for me. He saw the two masked men enter my backyard from his kitchen window and saw them throwing multiple things at the windows of the house. By the time any police officers arrived at the house, those two masked men clearly knew better than to have stuck around. Chris invited me to sleep at his place for the night just to be safe. He was good friends with my dad before he moved, so he really didn't mind helping me. Having good relations with your neighbors may just save your life one day, you never know. What I do know is this experience made me hate Halloween just that much more. With me?